beautiful English prose. A transliteration of this lecture also finds place in the collection of Bengali writings of Sir Jagadish Chandra called Obbokto. And the voice, instead of Voice of Life, that piece is called Nivedon. So I recommend to all people present here to read both of them. In my mind, the Voice of Life is an example of exquisite prose, English prose, written with tremendous conviction and full of hope, which continues to be a beacon for us, beacon for everybody who believe in Swamiji's teaching that education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. Talking about the future, Acharya Jagadish Chandra writes, there can be no real misgiving for the future when at the country's call, man offers the strength of his life and woman her active devotion. She most of all, who has the greater insight and larger faith because of her life of austerity and self-abnegation. Okay. Then he spends a few words on India's special aptitudes in contribution to science. Sir J.C. says, the excessive specialization of modern science in the West has led to the danger of losing sight of the fundamental fact that there can be but one truth, one science, which includes all the branches of knowledge. How chaotic appear the happenings in nature. Is nature a cosmos in which the human mind is someday to realize the uniform march of sequence, order, and law? India, through her habit of mind, is peculiarly fitted to realize the idea of unity and to see in the phenomenal world an orderly universe. This trend of thought led me unconsciously to the dividing frontiers of various sciences and shaped the course of my work in its constant alterations between the theoretical and the practical, from the investigation of the inorganic world to that of organized life, and its multifarious activities of growth, of movement, and even of sensation. On looking over 150 different lines of investigation carried on during the last 23 years, I now discovered in them a natural sequence. And then he goes on to talk about how he was led from his study of the electric waves and the development of the detector 4 millimeter waves, and using the same detectors, how he found very similar responses in animate as well as inanimate objects to external electrical stimuli. And from there, he went on to speculate that the borderline between life and inanimate, or non-life as he called them, is probably sparser than we are led to believe through the usual education. Sir Jagadish Chandra had a very deep association with another stalwart of the time. In fact, one of the greatest human beings that has ever walked, in addition to, of course, Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna and others, Rabindranath Tagore. And Rabindranath was one person who wrote a number of articles describing Sir Jagadish Chandra's research in various easily understandable terms in Bengali and all that. And he was one of the greatest supporters during Sir J.C.'s travails. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose's work on electromagnetic waves was certainly very readily accepted in the West, but when he went on to talk about the response, the dissolving difference between the inanimate and the animate objects, then the West was loath to accept that. And Jagadish Chandra actually faced those challenges, those criticisms very manfully. He tried to prove his viewpoint correct in the true way of a scientist, through better repeated experiments, better measurements, by devising more sophisticated equipments with which he could answer his critics and so on. And one person who steadfastly supported him in his entire efforts was Rabindranath Tagore. And Rabindranath was once asked that how did he feel that Jagadish Chandra's scientific visions were correct? He didn't have any formal training himself in science, so how could he make judgment about the profoundness of Sir Jagadish's work? And Rabindranath's answer was that I believed the lessons that we have been brought up on, the lessons of the Upanishad, that there is a prana pervading the entire world. Jagadish Chandra would be able to scientifically prove that, establish that fact quantitatively. Sir Jagadish, whether he tried it, proved it or not at that point of time, remains open to question. According to the views of most scientists, most of his contemporary scientists, his observations certainly did not justify the conclusions that he was drawing. But I can tell you that just a few years ago, on the occasion of the sesquicentennial of Sir Jagadish, the University of Cambridge, Christ's College, where Jagadish Chandra was an undergraduate student, organized a one-day international symposium, the title of which was From Physics to Plant Physiology, Journey of a Lifetime. And this one-day symposium was attended by several really distinguished experts from the entire world, primarily from England, Germany, and the USA. And the universal consensus that was arrived at the end of the symposium, I had the privilege of being present there to represent Bose Institute. And I also had another duty to perform, which I'll come to in a minute. But the general consensus at the end of this one-day, rather intense symposium was that if J.C. Bose's work in the area of electromagnetic waves, millimeter waves, was about 50 to 60 years ahead of the times, as Sir Neville Mott had appraised it, his work in the area of electrophysiology was certainly a century ahead of its time. With single cell measurements, many of the observations that J.C. had made in early 1900s were now being established. The interpretations of things could have been, probably are not exactly as J.C. had interpreted them to be, but it was the spirit of inquiry that has triumphed. On that occasion, I had the rare privilege of offering a bust of Sir J.C. Bose for the gardens of Christ's College, Cambridge, and the only two other busts in that garden belonged to Milton and Darwin. So the ultimate triumph of the thought process of analysis of scientific inquiry is something which makes society a better society to live in. And this is one intellectual endeavor which, as Swami Attopriyananda has said, that trying to straighten the dog's tail straightens all of us out. So in the pursuit of that scientific inquiry, I believe lives hope for the future society. The spirit of inquisitiveness is what characterized the human civilization all along, and it must continue to do so. Otherwise, it would, this is again, I keep quoting Swami Bhaktipriyanandaji's lecture, and he has said it all, and much more beautifully than I could ever articulate. But to get back to Sir Roger's example, if we lose that spirit of inquiry, if we lose that question, entire human existence would boil down to an algorithm. And then we would not be able to ask, what is the role of the man in the scheme of the universe? And it is this question, trying to understand what the role of man in the universe is what makes a man a man. Einstein once very famously said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. We can understand the laws that govern, and we can govern the dynamics of the universe, and we can always write down an algorithm. But the capacity to write that algorithm down, to ask the question that needs to be asked, is something which all of us hold very, very dear to us. And I'm confident that that would have been the cornerstone of the future society that Swami Vivekananda must have wished for us. Namaskar.
We now have Professor Makarand R. Paranjape, Professor in English from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He will present his paper on Swami Vivekananda as one of the main molders of the modern world, as stated by A.L. Basham, Indologist.
Thank you, Maharaj. Pujya Swami Atmapriyanandaji in the chair, Professor Shivaji Raha, other revered Swamijis and Matajis of the Ramakrishna Mission and the Sharada Mission. It's a great privilege for me to be here, to join you in this journey to understand Swamiji during this sesquicentennial year of his birth. In fact, I was privileged to start this journey last January in the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where there was another conference to inaugurate this year's celebration. And it's a singular privilege to be here in the concluding conference as well. And I take this as a sign of Swamiji's grace. When I spoke to Jagannath Maharaj about this conference, he was kind enough to invite me, and we talked on the phone. I told him I'm really scared to come here and speak in front of all the learned monks and other people. And I was absolutely right, because when I was listening to Swami Atmapriyanandaji, my mind went into a different zone altogether. I'm sure a lot of you must have shared this experience. And, we academics who work at universities, we work at a mental level, which is a very limited level. It's a cerebral level, and we look at things critically. We are trained in critical hermeneutics or interpreting things. And when someone speaks from a higher level, like Swamiji or Swami Bodhanandaji, then it creates a certain kind of cognitive churning. And you begin to realize that one of the key challenges in front of us today in our academic world is also how to sort of occupy that level of consciousness, you might even call it a higher level of consciousness, and yet engage with intellectual or academic or historical matters. I think this is the challenge, and I'll come back to it at the end of my presentation again. The reason I brought it up at the outset is that, when we engage with Swamiji, we can do so as devotees, or we can do so as intellectuals trained in the secular academy. And sometimes the two perspectives are not entirely the same. But as Swami Tyagananda ji said, the real challenge is how to mediate between these two perspectives so that we do not necessarily produce hagiographical interpretations which don't produce new knowledge, nor do we end up being needlessly critical. Like some of my colleagues, Jyotirmay Sharma has written a book on Swamiji which argues that he was a progenitor of the Hindu supremacist ideology. So you see, between these two poles, one has to find a mediating ground, which is what I will try to do in my presentation. But let me first offer a summary so that my argument becomes clear. I was asked to look at A.L. Basham's remarks on Swamiji, which I'm going to examine. And this is what I consider his remarks to mean. If we were to take A.L. Basham's lead, then one of Swami Vivekananda's greatest contribution to the modern world is that he led the counter-attack from the East. This is a quotation. It's actually the title of a book by C.E.M. Joad, and was the first Indian religious teacher in recent times, according to Basham, to make an impression outside India, unquote. So this presentation examines such a claim, arguing that Vivekananda's mission to the West brought about a profound alteration in the terms of inter-religious dialogue, which goes from exclusivism to inclusivism to pluralism. Swami Bhajanananda ji has argued that the final sort of progress of this sort of movement is to the universal religion that Swamiji talked about, even in that Chicago address of his. Notable among his other contributions to modernity was the idea of the universal religion, as I just said, and the new harmonizing of science and spirituality, which the previous speaker alluded to, that he predicted but could not fully accomplish in his lifetime. But to arrive at a proper understanding of Vivekananda's contribution to the modern world, we shall have to go beyond Basham's tribute to critically examine questions of rationality, faith, authority, spiritual experience, social transformation, and the arrival of a global consciousness, which Swamiji hinted at earlier, that may or may not actually save humankind and planetary life from its current crisis. Anyhow, now let me spend a few minutes to look more closely at what Basham said. But before that, I just want to say that this modern world in which we live was not the creation of the East. It was not the creation of Africa or of Australian Aboriginals or of the natives of North America or South America. This was a European creation, as we know. And to understand modernity, I think we have to understand three processes, at least three, if not more. The three key drivers of modernity were colonial expansion, the Industrial Revolution, and Enlightenment rationality. We can add other things, but these together fashioned this modern world, a new social and political order in which actually many other parts of the world were not only exploited and many civilizations destroyed, there was genocide of an unprecedented kind where lots of native cultures, the Aboriginals of Australia, the Native Americans of North America, lots of native populations and civilizations, the Incas, the languages, the hundreds of languages of the peoples of South America, all of these were destroyed in this modern world that was created. And even today, many parts of our globe feel excluded from this modern world, and some have become counter-systemic. As we know, they're anti-modern. They want to destroy this modern world. There are, just to give you an example, the jihadists want to have none of this. And then there are some who are not fully a part of this world because they live in a different time zone, in a different consciousness. And large parts of India belong to this group of people who are not fully absorbed in the modern world. There's a wonderful essay by Ainsley Ombre who talks about the progress of science in India. And he says that science in India functions in enclaves, You will see every scientific institution in India has very high walls, and you need permission to get inside. Usually you need a badge or you need some ID card, and it functions by a completely different logic than the rest of India, which is very chaotic, disorderly, and so forth. And science itself, in a fashion, has become a new, a new hegemonic construct, as many critics of science and technology and development have pointed out. A lot of people don't want to be developed. They want to remain, in their own traditions and ways of life. But science, like Swamiji suggested earlier, is like this genie who will consume you if you don't give it new tasks. And the technologization of the world, as several Western philosophers themselves have understood from, philosophers like Weber, who talked about the disenchantment of the world, Heidegger. You see, the point is that there is an opposition right from the beginning, from the birth of human civilization, between nature on the one hand and culture on the other hand. You see, human beings withdraw from nature and live in their own world, which is fashioned out of culture. And what some of these critics people who began to understand what science was doing, what technology was doing, they began to understand how culture was getting technologized and was basically being replaced by technology, so that human beings and human life was getting more and more mechanical, where space and time shrinkages happen. And this alters fundamentally human relationships. A lot has been written on it. I won't go into it deeply. But the point that I was trying to make, something that Basham doesn't talk about, is how Swamiji tried to offer an antidote to this kind of relentless, you might say inexorable progress of science, which takes us from humanism, the humanism of the Renaissance in the West, the rationality of the Enlightenment, to a more, you might call it, post-human future into which we've already been propelled or interpolated. Anyhow, now let's look more closely at Basham's remarks. I'm quoting him: "Even now, 100 years after the birth of Narendranath Datta, who later became Swami Vivekananda, it is very difficult to evaluate his importance in the scale of world history. It is certainly far greater than any Western historian or most Indian historians would have suggested at the time of his death. The passing of the years and the many stupendous and unexpected events that have occurred since then suggests that in centuries to come, he will be remembered as one of the main molders of the modern world, especially as far as Asia is concerned, and as one of the most significant figures in the whole history of Indian religion, comparable in importance to such great teachers as Shankara and Ramanuja, and definitely more important than the saints of local and regional significance, such as Kabir Chaitanya and many Nayanmars and Alawars of South India." So these are the remarks of Basham. I tried to find their original source. They're widely quoted on the internet, but I tried to find where these remarks were made, and I discovered that they were published in a book called Swami Vivekananda East and West, which was published by the Ramakrishna Vedanta Center in London in 1968. They occur on pages 210, 214. But I haven't found this book. I requested Jagannath Maharaj to tell me if it's in the RMIC library. Apparently it's not here. So what I'm saying is, as a person trained to read texts, one should look at the context of these remarks. You know, we can't just swallow them, so to speak, hook, line and sinker. We have to examine them critically in the context. So it seems to me that the remarks were made upon invitation. I think somebody wrote to Basham, asked him to comment on, to offer a tribute to Swamiji on his birth centenary, which was in, I suppose, 1963. And in response, Basham sent these comments. Now, when people write on such occasions, they usually want to say wonderfully flattering things, you know. And we in India love it when people from abroad praise us, because we have very little self-confidence. So when somebody else gives us a stamp of approval, we feel very happy. But if you look at the syntax of these comments, you will see that they have their own interesting structure. For example, what he says here, he starts by saying that it is difficult to evaluate his importance. You see, so he's saying something but also offering, you know, English language is capable of such nuances which we cannot forget. So it's difficult to evaluate his importance in the scale of world history is the first point. And then the second point, which I completely agree with, is that it's greater than what Western historians have thought. If you look at most histories of the modern world, Swami Vivekananda doesn't figure. And even Indian historians don't consider his contribution as important as what Basham says. So Basham is absolutely right that his contribution has been underestimated. In other words, what I was trying to say is this modern world has not been created by people from the East. There's not a single important scientific invention or even theory, you know, barring one or two exceptions. We heard about J.C. Bose today, but most of the important scientific discoveries have come from the West. And we may flatter ourselves to think that we produce a number of scientific papers in India, but I'm told that they are not of very great significance. And even the best Indian scientists work abroad, barring a few exceptions. This is the colonized world in which we live, and we have to accept these realities. Colonial science in India, somehow, I mean that period up to the independence and a few years later, produced more significant scientists than the last 40, 50 years after independence, where Indian scientists have to be in laboratories abroad to win Nobel Prizes, whether it's Hargobind Khurana or, and you know, many Indian scientists have got, some Indian scientists have got Nobel Prizes, but not from India. So these are realities that we have to accept. So even if the Indian state supports science and makes it a part of the Indian preamble, it's not as if science, you know, very high quality science is being done in India. That's what, you know, my limited understanding is. Anyhow, the point I'm trying to make is that the Indian contribution to the modern world is not very significant by all accounts. So if you want to understand Swamiji's contribution, you'll have to have another methodology to understand it. And that is where I think, so what does Basham say? Basham says he's one of the molders of the modern world. And then he says, if not the modern world, at least of Asia. And then he says, if not of Asia, of India. So you see the way his syntax is organized. And then he says, in India is as important as Shankara and Ramanuja, and definitely more important than saints of local or regional significance such as Kabir and Chaitanya. Now we all know that Kabir and Chaitanya are not figures of local importance. You see, Chaitanya started a movement which had all India ramifications and now global ramifications through ISKCON. So Basham is clearly wrong there. Similarly, Kabir had incredible importance in India. It's not local. He was not confined to Banaras. So, and we must also remember that Basham was a historian of ancient India, not of modern India. His knowledge of modern India is not considered on par with his knowledge of ancient India. His great book was The Wonder That Was India. So we have to take these remarks in that context. But I think the important thing that he says, why is Swamiji's contribution so important according to him, is because he led the counter-attack from the East. This Counter-Attack from the East is the title of a book by C.E.M. Joad, and the subtitle of that book is The Philosophy of Radhakrishnan. This book was published in London by George Allen and Unwin in 1933. So basically, what this counter-attack from the East really means is that it is the East influencing the West. And if Joad's book is on Radhakrishnan, then obviously Radhakrishnan could not have been possible without Vivekananda. It is Vivekananda who sets the stage for a number of East to West movements. Now, why is this important? Because as Basham says, India in ancient times made a great impact on the world around it, especially through Buddhism, even Hinduism. Hinduism spread in the southeast of Asia, and Hinduism and Buddhism moved together, right? So India made a huge impact on the Eastern world, right up to Japan, Indonesia, Cambodia, China, what used to be the culture of Malaysia before it got Islamized. The whole of this belt, Thailand, the script, the languages, the religions, the religious ideas, and the founding concepts of these societies actually came from India. So India had a much greater influence at that period than it had in modern times. But in modern times, it was Swamiji who moved from India to the West